By September 21, 1944, Private Jim Hertzfeld found himself sitting in the deep, freezing mud somewhere in eastern France. He was trapped in an endless transit camp, waiting for his name to be called. The U.S. Army needed a way to keep its frontline divisions at full strength after the heavy casualties of the summer. Their solution was the individual replacement system. Men were not sent forward as cohesive, bonded units. Instead, they were treated as single, interchangeable parts, held in massive logistical pools nicknamed repel-debels, until a combat unit requisitioned a body to fill a gap. You can read Jim fighting back against that erasure in his letters home. He refused to look at the European landscape like an infantryman. Instead, he analyzed the dirt, the rain, and the fields entirely through the eyes of a 28-year-old Northwest Ohio farmer. While a teenager from the city might only see foreign mud, Jim wrote to his family detailing the local agricultural system. He studied the local crops, specifically pointing out the massive mangelwurzels, a type of starchy fodder beet used to feed livestock over the winter. Evaluating the foreign soil gave him a way to maintain his civilian identity. Studying European crops kept his mind tethered to the 100 acres of wheat, oats, and fruit trees waiting for him back on Albon Road in Maumee, Ohio. There was exactly one piece of home right there in the camp with him, Private Harold Comm. Comm was a fellow Lucas County local. They had enlisted on the exact same day. Their serial numbers were only 70 digits apart, and they had survived the entire training cycle together. In the isolation of the replacement pool, Comm was Jim's only true anchor. Then, on October 7th, the logistical machine did exactly what it was built to do. The 30th Infantry Division needed riflemen. Comm's number was pulled from the roster, and Jim's was not. The separation devastated them both. Jim wrote to his wife, Georgette, describing how Comm was nearly in tears when he climbed into the transport truck. Jim admitted he was deeply in the dumps, grieving the loss of the man he had planned his entire post-war life with. The timing of that departure was brutal. Jim had already endured a 10-week drought from the military mail system. With Comm gone, Jim was cut off from every single familiar voice in the world. The system worked perfectly. The Army had processed Jim through the pipeline, separated him from his closest friend, and severed his communication with Ohio. He was a blank slate, fully available for the front line. On October 13th, the wait finally ended. Jim was permanently assigned to Company K, 115th Regiment of the 29th Infantry Division. He was sent to that specific company for a grim reason. Just 9 days earlier, Company K had been caught in a brutal German counterattack at a town called Schierwaldenroth. The unit had been nearly annihilated, losing all its officers and the vast majority of its enlisted men in a matter of hours. Jim was part of the immediate influx of bodies required to rebuild the unit from scratch. This historical account of the 29th Division puts those numbers into perspective. By the time Jim arrived, the Blue and Gray Division had already lost 16,000 men in combat since D-Day. The sheer volume of casualties required a continuous, desperate feed of fresh replacements directly into the trenches. The division was supposedly holding a quiet sector near the German border. The reality was a daily misery of freezing autumn rain, collapsed dugouts, and terrifying night patrols to probe the enemy lines. Jim's letters shift in tone here. The detailed observations about local crops vanish. The stoic farmer hardens, accepting the cold reality of his environment and telling his family that he will have to fight like the devil to survive what is coming. On November 14th, 2 days before the next major Allied offensive, the administrative dam finally broke. The military mail system caught up with Company K. Jim received over 30 separate letters and 11 birthday cards in a single delivery. After months of absolute silence, he was hit with a tidal wave of news from Georgette, his parents, and his siblings. He wrote back immediately, his handwriting frantic with relief. He told Georgette that the mail had lifted his spirits entirely. He promised her again that he was going to make it through the war and return to raise their 3 boys. That massive mail call gave Jim a few hours to feel like a husband and a father again. It was a brief, sudden gasp of civilian life, arriving just 48 hours before the entire division was ordered into the attack. Operation Queen began on November 16th. Thousands of Allied artillery cannons opened fire simultaneously, ripping the freezing autumn air apart in a massive barrage. The goal was to crack the West Wall, the heavily fortified Siegfried Line, and push the German army back across the Ruhr River. This tactical map traces the 29th Division's objective. The 115th Regiment was ordered to push through the Rhineland toward the fortified villages of Seersdorf and Durboslar. The terrain between them is entirely flat, open pastureland, looking exactly like the terrain back in Maumee. But the German army held the high ground. Forward observers used the towering stone church steeple in Seersdorf to look down over the fields. They had pre-registered every coordinate, zeroing in their heavy guns on the open approaches. The very landscape that Jim understood so deeply, the flat, open farmland, gave the advancing American infantry absolutely nowhere to hide. On November 19th, Company K received their orders. The regiment had secured Seersdorf the day before, but the advance had to continue. They were ordered to step off into the mud and assault the next line of defenses. Jim and the replacements advanced along the exposed roads. They had tank support, but the German artillery rained down heavily, tearing through the American ranks. Somewhere in the freezing mud outside Seersdorf, the German shells found Company K. Private Jim Hertzfeld was killed in the barrage, falling in a foreign field he would never get to harvest. The life of a deeply observant farmer, a husband and a father of 3, was reduced to a sterile military record, listing his cause of death simply as blast effects from an artillery shell. Back in Ohio, the family waited. The dreaded War Department telegram finally arrived at Georgette's door in early December, informing her that Jim had been killed in action. Because the military casualty system moved faster than the postal service, the timeline inverted. Days after Georgette received the telegram confirming Jim was dead, the mail carrier delivered his final, joyful letter, full of his promises to come home. In 1948, Jim's remains were repatriated to Maumee, Ohio, finally returning to the soil he knew. The U.S. Army's replacement system had functioned exactly as designed, keeping the front line moving forward, but it left Georgette Hertzfeld to raise 3 boys alone, carrying the permanent, quiet cost of the war.